Michigan, March 2012. Haven Creek is one of those towns that smells like bread in the evenings and wet leaves in the mornings. On the main street, a bakery and a post office. In the park, swings that have been creaking the same way for 20 years. Large letters usually arrive here late and quickly become small. But in the middle of March, in one mailbox, lay a letter that did not want to become small. Evelyn Marlowe, a former music teacher, was returning home after a church choir rehearsal. She took off her gloves, checked the box at the gate, and pulled out a thin stack of envelopes. On top, white, without a stamp and return address, but with a fresh postmark. On the front side, her name was written in simple black marker, as if by a hurried hand. Evelyn stood for a moment with the letter in her hands. A step, another, and, unable to resist curiosity, opened it right on the porch. On the sheet, there were only 9 words. March 30, 2012. Water will come at night. Close the windows in advance. The handwriting jumped, now larger, now smaller, with nervous pressure on the letters O and K. Evelyn smiled. A bad joke. The sheet went into the kitchen drawer for all sorts of things, with a rubber band, an old cookie recipe, and a note with the plumber's number. 2 weeks later, on the evening of March 30th, the city was covered by a wall of rain. The water came in an even, dense curtain, gluing asphalt and glass. By midnight, a puddle rose in the school basement. Then the water went up the steps. Somewhere, a transformer blinked. The district was left without power. By morning, Evelyn's yard had turned into a shallow lake, and only then she remembered the letter. She found it in the drawer, smoothed it with trembling fingers, and reread slowly, syllable by syllable, so as not to confuse either the day nor the meaning. Water will come at night. It came. The next day, the local newspaper Haven Creek Times came out with a cheerful but guilty headline. Storm of the century caught public services by surprise.
On the third page, a photo of firefighters pumping water out of the school basement. There, below, a short note. A resident reported a strange letter with a warning about the downpour. Police are checking. Below the note were the initials of the reporter, T. Whitaker. Evelyn did not need to be persuaded for long. She understood how her story sounded. "I don't want people pointing fingers at me," she told Tessa Whitaker at the door, but still showed the envelope. Tessa, young, composed, with a pencil behind her ear, photographed the sheet carefully, promised nothing and denied nothing. If this is someone's game, it can be calculated. If not, she slightly shrugged her shoulders, then this is no longer news, but a matter of safety. The second letter came to another person. April 14, 2012. Farmer Benjamin Cross was repairing a tractor in his barn when his wife brought him the mail. Among the bills and ads, the same white envelope. No address, no sender. On the front side, Ben Cross. He sat on the tractor step, wiped his hands on a rag, tore the paper. Inside was one line. April 17, 2012. Don't send the children to school. Cross frowned, read it twice, and laughed without joy. He showed it to his wife. She crossed herself and whispered, "Nonsense." On April 17, a truck driver lost control at the intersection near Haven Creek School. The truck flew onto the curb, knocking over the fence and benches. School children were not there yet. Classes began later because of a teachers' meeting. In the local newspaper, the headline appeared, "Miracle at Haven Creek School, no victims." And in small print, a source reports that one of the parents received an anonymous warning letter. The police are investigating. By May, Haven Creek was already whispering. Someone said the letters were sent by teenagers. Someone that it was a church sect. And someone swore that this was the work of the post office itself. They know everything in advance. They control the weather.
The sheriff, Douglas Reed, spoke briefly. "We are checking all versions." But in the evenings in the diner, he sat with a cup of coffee longer than usual and reread the same photocopy, the first letter. Tessa Whitaker, the reporter, felt that the story was slipping away from her. She collected rumors, but there were no facts. And then, on May 9th, the envelope came to her personally. On the table in the newsroom, among press releases and magazines, lay a white envelope with her name. The handwriting was the same, nervous, unbalanced, black marker. Inside, May 12, 2012, "Do not stand on the bridge, 1945. Tessa sat for a long time in her chair, feeling her pulse in her temples. Then she got up, went to the sheriff, and put the letter in front of him. Reed looked at her seriously. "If this is true, we will block the bridge. And if it's a prank? Then the whole city will laugh at me. But if it's not, we'll have bodies in the river. I'll take the laughter." On May 12th, at 7 in the evening, patrol cars blocked both ends of the Haven Creek Bridge. Drivers grumbled, pedestrians asked questions. The sheriff stood by, checking his watch. At 1940, nothing happened. At 1945, too. And at 1947, above the river, one of the suspension cables snapped with a metallic scream. The bridge sagged, boards split, the support beam went into the water. No one was injured. The bridge was closed for reconstruction. The next morning, the local radio was already buzzing. Letters that predict the future. The townspeople now no longer joked. Evelyn Marlowe crossed herself every time she passed her mailbox. Benjamin Cross stopped letting his children go to school alone. And Tessa Whitaker began a notebook titled Letters. She glued in photocopies, wrote down the time, weather, names of the recipients. In the margins, she drew arrows, connected dates, and constantly circled one phrase. Who writes them? How does he know? June 2012. The letters no longer appeared every week, but each new one froze blood. June 18. Librarian Martha Hill opened her envelope. Inside, 21. Don't go down to the basement. She laughed nervously. The basement in the library had been closed for years. But on June 21, a gas pipe burst there. The old locks held, the fire didn't spread. But the firefighters said straight, if someone had been inside, they wouldn't have gotten out.
July 4, Independence Day. A white envelope lay in the mailbox of 16-year-old Daniel Cooper. Don't light fireworks. Daniel shrugged it off, but his mother, reading the line, strictly ordered, "No fireworks this year." That evening, several rockets exploded in the hands of careless teenagers at the edge of town. Burns, but alive. By the end of summer, Haven Creek had split into two halves. Some believed the letters were saving lives, others that they were provoking fear and accidents themselves. The sheriff stood in the middle, repeating to reporters, "We are working with experts. We cannot comment further." But Tessa knew experts had nothing. No fingerprints on the envelopes. The paper was ordinary, bought in any store. The postmarks were real, but the sender was untraceable. As if the letters were placed in the system from the inside. September 2012. The town was waiting. Every creak of the mailbox lid made hearts pound. Children joked less, and even in the diner, conversations died down when someone mentioned the white envelopes. On September 10th, the letter came to the pastor of the local church, Father Jonathan Hale. Inside was only one line. September 14. Do not open the church doors after sunset. The pastor read it aloud at the parish council. Opinions split. Some insisted it was blasphemy, others that it was divine protection. On September 14, at 7:30 in the evening, two men tried to break into the church. They were drunk, with crowbars. The heavy doors were locked. They failed to get in, and by the time the police arrived, they were detained at the porch. The town now whispered not only about predictions, but about salvation. The congregation said, "The letters guard us." Skeptics countered, "They provoke criminals and accidents themselves." Tessa, flipping through her notebook, saw one pattern. The letters always warned of danger, but never explained its source, and they never repeated. December 2012. Snow covered Haven Creek with a thick blanket. Life seemed to quiet down. But on December 19, Evelyn Marlowe, the same woman who had received the very first letter, found another envelope in her mailbox. Inside, December 24. Don't leave the house after 9 p.m. Christmas Eve, 9:15 p.m. On the road near Evelyn Street, a drunk driver lost control. The car skidded onto the sidewalk, broke a fence, stopped against a lamppost. Evelyn, sitting by the window with tea, saw the flash of headlights and shivered. If she had gone out to midnight mass, as she always used to, she would have been there. January 2013. The letters stopped for a while. People exhaled. The sheriff even allowed himself to say in an interview, "Perhaps it's over." But on February 2, a letter was found by Benjamin Cross's wife. The sheet read, February 5, don't let Ben go to the barn. On February 5th, the roof beam collapsed in the barn. Ben stood outside smoking and heard the crack, the rumble. He was pale for a long time, holding his wife's hand. "It saved me." March 2013. A year had passed since the first letter. Haven Creek was no longer the same town. People avoided evening walks, locked their doors earlier, and looked at their mail with fear, not joy. On March 15, the envelope came to Sheriff Douglas Reed himself. Inside were the words, March 18, don't drive Highway 6, 2230. Reed sat in his office for a long time, staring at the line. He showed it only to Tessa. If I don't drive there and something happens, people who say I chickened out. If I do drive there and it happens, there might not be time to regret it.
On March 18th at 22:30, a truck carrying logs overturned on Highway 6. The road was blocked, the logs scattered. 2 cars were crushed. The sheriff at that moment was at home, sitting in silence with the letter in his hands. The next day, for the first time, he called the letters not anonymous notes, but warnings of unknown origin. Tessa Whitaker wrote in her notebook, "The one who sends them chooses not just days, but turning points. He watches. He knows who and where we are." June 2013. Summer heat settled over Haven Creek. The streets were empty in the afternoons. Windows were closed, and mailboxes remained untouched. On June 10th, Evelyn Marlowe received another envelope. Inside, June 13. The river rises. Stay on the hill. On June 13th, heavy rains flooded the riverbank. Homes near the water were submerged. Those who ignored the warning had to be rescued. Evelyn, on the hill with neighbors, watched the current sweep away fences, garden furniture, even a small boat. The town finally understood these were not coincidences. Someone knew more than anyone should. Someone was watching. Tessa Whitaker wrote in her notebook, "The letters no longer bring curiosity. They bring survival. Each line is a choice, and each choice, life or death." Sheriff Reed called a meeting of the town council. Cameras were installed on every corner. Volunteers patrolled streets at night, and mailboxes were observed. Yet every time the letters found their way to the intended recipient. September 2013. Haven Creek had grown silent, tense. The town no longer laughed at the letters. On September 21, Benjamin Cross received an envelope. Inside, September 24, don't work in the barn after sunset. That evening the barn caught fire. Benjamin, already at home, heard the crackling from a distance. If he had been inside, it would have been fatal. Evelyn Marlowe, visiting Tessa, whispered, "It's the same pattern. The letters warn first, then punish if ignored." Tessa nodded, her notebook full of dates and phrases. Floods, fires, accidents, near misses. She finally understood. The letters were not random. They were tests. Tests of fear, obedience, attention.
Sheriff Reed said quietly, "Whoever does this knows our routines, our fears, even our choices." The town, meanwhile, lived on edge. Mailboxes were opened cautiously. Parents stayed home with children. Everyone double-checked windows, doors, and lights. Even the church set up volunteers to monitor the streets at night. December 2013. Snow fell quietly, covering Haven Creek in white.
but the fear remained. On December 20, Tessa Whitaker received another envelope. Inside, December 24, don't leave your house after 8 p.m. Christmas Eve arrived. Streets were empty. Tessa stayed home, listening to the wind and the occasional crack of distant fireworks. At 8:15 p.m., a car skidded on ice and crashed into a tree near her usual route home. She shivered, realizing how narrowly she had avoided danger. Evelyn Marlowe, who had returned to visit the town for the holidays, received an envelope the next day. December 27, stay away from the post office. She laughed nervously, but that evening a small fire broke out in the post office, contained quickly, no one was injured. Evelyn understood the letters were not only warnings, they were control. Sheriff Reed, exhausted, said, "We cannot stop them. They know us better than we know ourselves." By the end of the year, the town had adapted. People checked every letter with fear. Mail carriers worked under constant surveillance. Even the children learned a white envelope could mean life or death. And then, for the first time, the letters stopped arriving for months. The town exhaled, but everyone knew the calm was only temporary. The author of the letters had disappeared into the shadows, waiting for the next move.
Spring 2014. Haven Creek seemed to breathe again. People walked, worked, children played. Mailboxes returned to normal, or so it seemed. Evelyn Marlowe had moved to her sister's house in another state. She tried to forget the letters, tried to forget the fear. But in quiet moments, her hands trembled at the thought of a white envelope. Sheriff Douglas Reed continued his work, but now every envelope arriving in town made him pause. Every piece of mail was examined, photographed, and recorded. Tessa Whitaker, still reporting, wrote cautiously, "The letters have stopped for now. Haven Creek is silent, but silence is also a warning." And then, one evening, Reed found an envelope in his own mailbox. No words, just a blank sheet of paper. He sat for a long time, staring at the emptiness. No handwriting, no instructions, no dates. Just the white surface of paper that could hold anything. And in that moment, he understood. The true author was still near. The game was not over. It was only waiting for the next move.